Hello and welcome to Sunday Club. It is 10:30 a.m.-ish on a Sunday morning, which means we are going to be live streaming some Ruby on Rails this morning. So what we're going to do is carry on from where we left off last week. So if you haven't seen this channel before, basically what we're doing is each week we work on a bit of an app. And so for the last few weeks, we've basically been setting up the, kind of some basic stuff, and we're kind of coming towards the end of that and hopefully looking to add some functionality soon. So you can go back on the channel and take a look at anything that you're interested in. Each of the episodes should be divided into chapters so you can kind of find anything specific that you might be looking for, and then reach out in comments if you have any questions or if there's anything you're interested in learning some more about. And what we try and do is look through options that learners might have, whether you're maybe not when you're brand new to Rails, but maybe when you're coming to the end of your first few tutorials, or you're looking to maybe come out of a boot camp or something like that. You might have questions about how you want to approach certain features or something like that. And so that's really what we want to look at on a real app that we've built. And so during last week, we looked at adding users. We ended up looking at a few different options, so different gems that people might be interested in doing or kind of working on it themselves, and kind of some pros and cons of that. And this week, what we want to do is basically, now that we have users in the system, and we looked at using Devise, we were able to basically say, okay, well, we only want people that are logged in to be able to access this page or this controller action or something like that. What we want this time is to say, we actually want, it doesn't matter if you're logged in, we actually want only certain users to access that page. And so that's this concept of roles and permissions and all of the kind of lovely things around that in Rails. So we want to look at that and implementing how we're going to do that. So we're going to follow the same format. We're going to look at some options that are available to us, and then we're going to try and implement it live. So some follow-up from stuff during the week. I actually did get a chance to look at some work on potential like UI related stuff and how this app might actually work / look, which is not normal practice. Normally you wouldn't start building it and then work out what you're building. But just for the live stream, we just wanted to kind of get the basics up and running for the first few weeks, which we're kind of coming towards the end of now. So I was looking at a couple of kind of services that do the same thing. In those initial episodes, we looked at the Streamlabs one, which is the service that I use for the actual live streams themselves, and they basically give you like a one page for live streamers. And there's another one, I've already forgotten its name, but we'll take a look at it in the next kind of coming weeks. And basically you give them your YouTube channel, and then using the API, they basically build a little kind of mini website for it. And that's kind of what we're looking to do as well. Basically, like we want to build a website for this channel, but what we also want to do is allow other people to build websites for other channels, and maybe new pages appear when new videos appear and stuff like that. So that'll let us explore all of the stuff we've done so far, so the models and the associations and all that stuff, adding users, adding permissions, external APIs, and building UI out for all that stuff, with all the Tailwind stuff. So all of the things we've done so far are like building blocks to help us kind of get our app up and running. So I did a little research around that and kind of jotted some notes up, and I think I'll start to put something a bit more formal in place for the next 5 or 6 episodes, I think, just to give us a structure as to what we're going to build. Because I think that the most useful thing might be if I say, here's the direction we're going in terms of what we want to achieve. And I did talk about maybe doing a homework club or homework edition during the week with UI. I didn't get a chance to do that, but I think that might be the good way to do it. So just put an evening aside, or maybe a Saturday or something like that, and just put a few hours just to work in Figma or Sketch, and work out what we want functionality in and functionality we want to aim towards, and then we can do that together. Okay, and so a little bit more follow-up. I haven't done any of the Git tidy up that I had mentioned I was going to do last week. Again, I just didn't have the spare time to do that, but that's something that we can kind of do maybe on a homework edition, just to take a look at together, and we can kind of get that solved. Okay, so I'm just going to do one thing real quick, which we do every week, and check the audio from the stream, just so that we know that we can hear ourselves, because we have had issues with that in the past. So bear with me just a second. Yep, that's my voice. Perfect. Okay, cool. So that's working. We can refresh that. Great, let's go take a look at some code, shall we? Let's do that. Cool. So this is where we got to last week. We have, you can't actually see the inputs there because Tailwind has made them completely blank, but there's an email address and a password field, the little remember me option, our login button, a sign up button, so we can actually sign up, again with fields we can't see. And this all comes from the default Devise views. If you remember from last week, we've got forgot your password functionality, all from Devise, confirmation instructions, all from Devise. So that's all kind of built in. And then what we added towards the end of that episode was this idea of this base controller. Yes, we kind of rushed through this because it was a bit towards the end, but this idea of when you're in the control panel area of the app, we would be able to have a before action that ensures there's a user, and then everywhere that's inside the channels controller or suspension control, basically anywhere that's inside control panel, you can say make sure there's a user. That's what this authenticate user bang method does from Devise. So make sure there is a user for me there, and it worked. So we were basically able to go to the public pages. In fact, I don't think we've touched that. So we can go to a channel here. So this is, we're not logged in here. And we can go to our channel page. Again, there's nothing on here. And then if we want to edit that channel, we shouldn't be able to do that if we're not logged in, I think. Or did we not do the edit action for that one? Oh yeah, so that's still in channels one. Edit, it would be in the control panel, wouldn't it? So control, I can't remember the URL, control panel channels one. Yep, so then we can't get in and we've redirected to our sign in page. So that's what we implemented last week. So what we're gonna do this week is we only want users who are associated with that channel to be able to access the control panel for it. So the control panel is where you would administrate your channel, add new information, update it, change your logo, stuff like that. But there's going to be lots of channels in an app like this, and you're going to say, okay, well, there's 100 channels, but each user should only have access to 1, 2, 3, just a small number of them. So how do we make sure that, rather than saying make sure there is a user that's logged in, it has to be this user that's logged in. And so that's where we're going to come towards permissions. So let's do some work. So there are a couple of gems that tend to dominate here. And so one that comes up commonly for this will be can, which is now called can for historical reasons. And it's really widely used. I've used it a bunch. It's not my favorite, and the one that I would use, and hopefully we're going to implement, but we'll take a look at our other options, is called Pundit. And Pundit, we'll take a look at the differences, but Pundit takes a similar but different approach to the kind of permissions and authorizations within the app. And we'll take a look at the differences between the two. But what I thought we could do is take a look at, what was the website that we looked at last week where it was like, I think we looked at like Devise alternatives. It was this libhunt. Okay, cool. So, and this gave us like little comparison areas, and you could kind of get top stats with like top trumps, but for Ruby gems. So let's chuck can in here, and then what we'll do is we'll do the same thing. So let's duplicate that tab. We'll do the same thing but for Pundit, and let's see what it comes up with as alternative. So popularity 9 stars. If you remember last week, we were looking at Devise, and its popularity was like huge compared to the others. The kind of monthly downloads, the stars on GitHub, all of the metrics around it were just off the charts compared to the other ones. My assumption might be that authorization and permissions and stuff might be a bit different. So that's a popularity of 9. So for Pundit, Pundit, okay, comes up with a 9.5. So more monthly downloads than can. Okay, cool. So let's see what else. Okay, well, let's take the larger one, which is Pundit. And let's see what alternatives we've got. Okay, so we've got can, Rolify, which I haven't used, declarative authorization, authority, which I have heard of, ACL 9, access granted. And you can see that these are all measured by this kind of relative popularity. I don't know what the little arrow does. Oh, I see. That's like rising or staying the same or lowering. Okay. So access granted is rising in popularity, growing in popularity. That's cool. Console, roll core, banking. So it's the same as last week. Always so many options. So if you are a learner coming to this for the first time, there's a couple of pros and cons. Obviously, as we discussed, that you might want to go with the more popular option because you will find more documentation out there, more questions answered on Stack Overflow, for example. But probably one of the reasons that those gems are popular is they come with other things. Maybe things that you might not need, you might want just a small subset, or vice versa. There might be some of these less used gems that actually have a real killer feature that you really want. And so there is an element of due diligence if you are choosing to go through and take a look at the options here. And also, if you are a learner, we'll repeat from last week, it's really, really helpful to go and take a look at these and see how they work. It can be a bit intimidating, I think, in terms of they may be more complicated than you're used to. They may be doing things you haven't done before. Or maybe the code is structured in a way you're not familiar with, but hopefully there's documentation and issues and PRs and stuff that you can read that really help you learn or get an impression of what they're doing. Another downside there is that does take a lot of time. So if you say, okay, well, I'm going to pick the top 10 and investigate each one, like realistically, if you spend an hour or two looking into them, that's days. Like there's a lot of time that you're spending just vetting auth gems. But when we're talking about these basic building blocks of our Rails app, kind of like a standard stuff, when you're learning, that isn't wasted time, that you will pick things up along the way, making notes and things like that are really useful. So reading code is a really really good skill to have, to practice what you get instincts for what you think about the way they've approached something, or you see a lot of gems, for example, will use a lot of meta programming because they have to genericize what they're trying to do beyond your app or any given app. They have to try and genericize it to any use case, and that's really interesting because your code suddenly becomes a level of abstraction away from doing the thing you think it's doing. And that's when you're first kind of getting started, that can be like, wait, what's happening here? So let's actually go and take a look at some of the ones that I haven't bumped into. So Rolify, I don't know this one. So let's go take a look at Rolify. Let's see what they're doing. So very simple roles library without any authorization enforcement, supporting scope on resource object. For anyone who's interested, I managed to get I spilled coffee all over the Sophie last week, and I had to go. I left the live stream almost immediately and went to buy like a stain remover stick, and it does seem to have worked. And I've also moved my desk around, so there's more space to put my coffee down this week. So I'm hoping there's no repeat of that, but it seems okay. Okay, very simple roles library without any authorization enforcement, supporting scope on resource object. Without any authorization enforcement. Let's go take a look at it. Let's go take a look. So let me just check. Can we see that? Yep. Okay. Okay, so very simple. Let's see an example. User has role, moderator, forum. False if user is a moderator of another forum. This library can easily be integrated with any authentication gem. Devise. So we're using Devise, auth logic and clearance, the ones we spoke about last week, and authorization gem that doesn't provide a role class. Right, I see. Okay, so this is just looking at the role aspect rather than any specific authorizations. So here, a moderator is a good example. You might have admin as a role, contributor, author, view only. These would all be roles that you might define in an app, depending on what you're building. So generate your role model. This is associating a role with a user rather than giving a user specific permissions. Mongoid, okay, cool. So Rolify, run migration, configure user model. That's actually on the user itself. Rolify accepts before add, after add, before remove, and presuming this is removing a role. Resource methods, forum. Resourceify. Assign the default role. And a role to use. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Just handling the role side of things. I think I've always kind of baked that myself, so it'd be interesting to use a gem for that, perhaps. One of the things that I've found with role-based logic is individual exceptions. So maybe someone, let's say you've got organizations that have many users, and then a user may have many roles. You might have a role that for 99% of organization works perfectly, but for one, you want to add one more permission. So they're like a moderator, but they can do some deletion that the other one can't do. Adding those as kind of individual permissions within a role that's attached to the user. I wonder if this gem kind of handles that case. Because if you kind of build that yourself where a role is simply a template set of permissions, but then that's always tricky to do depending on what how complex your use case is and how much flexibility you want to allow. Because as soon as you start doing things like individual opt-outs and opt-ins, you're basically granular rather than role-based. You're assigning each individual thing that a user can or cannot do, and it's easy for that to get missed in real-world usage. You might not have on an app that's like public or something, because it could be easy for someone to miss removing that role from someone's account if they needed to have it removed or something. But for an internal app or like kind of, where there's only a small number of users and they all belong to the same company, it can be less important, but it depends on what you're doing. Okay, so that's super good. Okay, so I'm super interested in that. So can we star that? That's a way of me generally clicking things and forgetting they exist. Okay, so we might come back to that for roles, but it does work with Pundit. Does it have anything on here specifically around around working with? So presumably you just do in your permission, you just check the role within the permission, I'm assuming, rather than checking it in the controller action. Actually, that could be kind of cool. We could do that. So let's go see if there's any other docs for this outside of this README. Oh yeah, cool. Depends. Oh, okay, not a lot. Look at his oh, here we go. If you want to, how to integrate. Look at this. This is exactly what I was looking for. Perfect. Devise and Can and Rolify tutorial. Okay, so there's the Can stuff. If user has role, admin can manage all. So yeah, so the Pundit would be the other way around, I guess. So they've got Pundit stuff in here. Is there... Oh, it said Pundit on that page when we went back. Oh no, so it's just a Can and Devise. Sorry, totally missed that. Cool. Okay, so we're the same theory. Also, maybe we could define some roles with Rolify and then check them with the permissions. Okay, well let's circle back to that. That's really interesting. What else have we got on here? Take a look. So that one's Can is 9. Rolify is 8.4. Let's take a look at declarative authorization. So we'll see what they're doing differently. An authorization mechanism inspired by RBAC. The most notable distinction to other authorization plugins is the declarative approach. That is, authorization rules are not defined programmatically in between business logic, but in an authorization configuration. Okay. With programmatic authorization rules, the developer needs to specify which roles are allowed to access a specific control action or part of view, which is not dry. With a growing application code base, roles permissions often change and new roles are introduced. Then at several places of the source code, the changes have to be implemented, possibly leading to omissions and thus hard to find errors. In these cases, a declarative approach as offered by auth increases the development and maintenance efficiency. Okay, I haven't... With those other systems, with like can and Pundit, you usually are working towards getting everything into a place, whether it's a role or something. So it's not something I've really bumped into a huge amount, because you're usually just using them as a mechanism to check the single source of truth about the permission. But let's see what this is saying. So that doesn't sound like a pain point that kind of had too much, but then I am aware that on larger apps you've got like maybe you're storing the roles in the multiple roles are coming. Yeah. So plugin features. I think I'm kind of looking for an example here of how this looks. There's authorization rules. Remember to implement the requirements of this gem. So role guest. Add permission for guests here. Has permission on conferences to read. Oh, okay. So this is really can-esque, where these would be abilities. Am I reading that right? So privilege manage includes, yeah, and these are yeah. This feels very much like can, where you have an ability class, which is, you then have can, read. The difference would be can read conferences, and then you can pass it an instance of a conference or something like that. And you can just do this like logic, so conference.user equals user or something like that. And then these privileges are like the aliases within what does can have? It has CRUD, I think. As manage is definitely, yeah, so manage is one, CRUD is another one, and then update, I think, does edit and update. A couple of these kind of do, yeah, I think a couple of these do two actions as aliases. Okay, so this, cool. I love a bit of ASCII diagrams. App domain, user, authorization config is in role, permission, privilege, and context. And then the app domain is the activity and the attribute. Okay. Administrator on the right side of this diagram, application developer special which necessary for use. Note the permissions consist of a privilege that is to be performed, such as read, and a context, such as companies. Yeah, okay. Permitted to. Yeah, this feels really similar to can. Just in the examples, I might be totally missing something on this, by the way. So if you're the author of this gem and you ever see this and you're like, you idiot, you've just missed the key difference between them. I'm really sorry, but I only scanned the README for 2 seconds, so sorry. Okay, cool. That's good though. Like having more options is good. Okay, let's take a look at one more, just out of interest. Let's take a look at authority. It's interesting to take a look at these. Okay, currently unmaintained. So I mean, like this stuff, you could fork it if you were interested in running your own gem. You could fork this and say, okay, well, I'm gonna be responsible for this. Users who have installed it decided to trust me, and I'm not comfortable transferring the trust to someone else on their behalf. However, if you'd like to fork it, feel free. And there's a script to migrate to Pundit. Okay, fair enough. Is there anything too overly different about this one's approach? More ASCII. This is the Rails authorization gem community love an ASCII diagram in their readmes, and I am totally on board with that. Okay, so this one seems to have this idea of an authorizer, which I think is going to be similar in my mind to what one of Pundit's policies, maybe. So like this is a schedule authorizer, and it would maybe be a schedule policy in Pundit. Okay, so that it's discontinued, but you can see the kind of approach. So really interesting. Like, there's too much. Let's go and take a look at Pundit, because I've been using CanCan a lot recently, and I know that Pundit had a bunch of. Where's the versions? They normally have a little releases thing on there. Here it is. Moved all of GitHub around. So 2019. Just looking at what's new in Pundit. I know there were a couple of larger changes that I can't remember. Probably be in some sort of changelog maybe. Yeah, I had used it a lot with namespaced policies. I think there were changes. I was doing stuff with namespaced policies. And yeah, I remember using a fork of this at some point around that change, I think, to 2.2. Okay. Well, I think that's still the one we want to go with, simply because I've got experience of it and didn't have any huge issues. So I think that's what we're going to implement. But I think all of the others are totally valid, and I think maybe we can try and use the Rolify one as well, just because it's caught my curiosity. And maybe we can do that at a separate time. So let's take a look at actually rolling this out. So what we want to do is basically say only users. Well, we won't bother putting an attribute on a user. We'll just hard code it to their ID for now. Basically, we just want to say only one specific user can access this specific channel in control panel. So let's install it. I'm not going to go back through Rails bytes because that was just a hassle that didn't really work out as any more useful than installing the app normally. But what we will do is take a quick look at the well, let's load the GitHub app up, because that was how we were doing talk. So this is add base controller within the control panel space. Added authenticate user. As a before action on the base controller. Oh, so just again, okay, this branch is getting out of hand. This is just lazy now. Come on, Max, we're gonna. So this one we don't actually need this change. So let's drop back into VS Code. It turned out we only needed the other one. So can we just We can revert that. We don't care about that one. It was the allow. Whatever the other change was. Oh, we just reverted this. Oh, do you have to save it? Okay. Save. Allow unconfirmed access. So that was basically the issue where you had to confirm it straight away. So this is not. Let's just leave that uncommitted now because that or that. This will be fine. So let's go to our gem file, and we can also kill our server because we don't need that running. And let's install the gem. I don't really need that version number on there. I think it came from. Then we're going to install it. So what we can then do is commit that. Pundit gem. And then there was some sort of script in that README. Optionally, you can run the generator, which will set up an application policy with some useful defaults. Let's do that because we want useful defaults. Okay, let's go take a look at these useful defaults. So Pundit has this concept of policies, and a policy is a class that says they're actually really basic. They're only pretty much not far off just from basic Ruby classes. So you have a policy, and you call a method on a policy when at the point that you want to authorize someone, and the method says yes or no. And what Pundit does is it gives you a naming strategy based on the controller that you're in, but you can actually have some influence over that as well. So you can say, well, I was doing it with namespaces, so you can actually pass in an array with symbols. So you could kind of name the policy whatever you wanted and check it there. But because you're just calling a method on a class, within that policy, you can do whatever you want. So you could, at that point, I imagine, call out to Rolify, which we might want to do. You could call to the database and see what's been loaded or load extra stuff up. You can kind of do whatever you want within that policy. So what Pundit is helping you do is map the controller actions to the policy, and it will also give you a couple of extra helper methods, which will be like ensure that authorization is being enforced for every controller action. And it will also say it'll give you the naming strategy to match two together. It will enforce them, and there's a couple of other things. I think it gives you some controller action-y stuff. But you can kind of see in this basic one, it gives you this application policy that you then inherit from. Oh, the other thing you get is this kind of user and the record. The user is your user or whatever resource you're going to try and authorize, and then the record is the thing that you're trying to act upon. And so these are set here, so you always have this user that's set by Pundit's stuff. And then here you have index, show, create, new, update, edit, destroy. And then you get scopy stuff, which I can't remember very well, so you might need to look into that if we need it later on. I'm just going to brush over it for now because let's just keep moving. So this is pretty cool. So we can commit that because we're just going to say that's our helpful new add default policy provided by Devise. Actually, let's just go to, before I do that, let's just go and take a look at what the policy does. So it's saying, oh, cool, it's just saying false for everything. So the defaults are all off. And also there's a lot of, if you look, new is essentially calling create. So the concept being that in can you would get kind of an alias called create, and that would handle new and create. I don't think it's called new and create. Maybe like, I can't remember what it's called. Maybe create does also alias to new. Can't imagine that, because then how would you call just create? But either way, all the defaults are false, but some of them don't even have their own default. They actually call to another one, because it's assumed you would want to be able to do both. If you can create, you can probably call new, and if you can update, you can probably call edit. So that's why it's that. So those are sensible defaults which we can keep. So we've committed that as well. Cool. So let's go and just checking the stream. Cool. So let's keep following the docs, because that was something that I wasn't doing earlier on in these streams and was getting. Okay, so Pundit is focused around the notion of policy classes, which suggests that you put these classes in app/policies. This is a simple example that allows updating a post if the user is an admin or if the post is published. So this is a really simple example. That is actually taken care of by inheriting from application policy, because we already have a user and a resource. But you can write it yourself. Again, that's super simple, and all we care about getting back is this Boolean value, user.admin or not post published. I'm assuming they're using or here, because I understood that using or as a word in Ruby was for control flow rather than generating a Boolean. Either way. Okay, so it ends with this. That's really so. The Pundit makes the following assumptions about this class. The class has the same name as some kind of model class, only suffixed with the word policy. That's basically the crux of the whole thing. The first argument is a user. In your controller, Pundit will call the current user method. That's provided by Devise for us. We could provide it otherwise to return our user if we weren't using. That's provided by Devise, yeah. So if we weren't using Devise, we could just implement that method somewhere in like application controller or something. The second argument is some kind of model object whose authorization you want to check. This does not need to be an active record or even an active model object. It can be anything. And the class implements some kind of query method, in this case update. Usually this will map to the name of a particular controller action. That's it really. Usually you'll want to inherit from the application policy or set up your own base class to inherit from. So if you see here, like that's the difference. So I said we got all that stuff from the application policy, and here's an example of that. They've inherited from application policy, and you can see it's not there. And the generator, is called record. Supposing you have an instance of post class, Pundit lets you do this in your controller. Authorize. The authorize method automatically infers that post will have a matching post policy class and instantiates this class, handing in the current user in the given record. It then infers from the action name that it should call update. Yeah, so that's really the work that Pundit is doing, is kind of inferring, which policy to go and get and which method on that policy to call. But you can call it specifically. You can do it down here yourself. In this case, you can imagine authorize would have done something like this. So yeah, it's the same thing. You can pass a second argument to authorize in the name of the permission you want to check. Doesn't match the action name. Yep, so you can pass that in. You can pass an argument to override the policy class if necessary. For example, that and that. Okay, so I think that's where I wasn't previously using an array at the start of authorize to generate the policy class, whereas presumably this then gets us around the namespacing stuff. Just looking to see if, given there is a policy without a corresponding model, you can retrieve it by passing a symbol. Given there is a policy without a corresponding model / Ruby class, you can retrieve it by passing a symbol. Still needs to accept 2 arguments, which would just be the symbol dashboard. Okay. If policy dashboard show, yep, scopes. Right, here's the scope stuff. Often you will want to have some kind of view listing records which a particular user has asked. When using Pundit, you are expected to define a class called a policy scope. Pundit makes the following assumptions about this class. The class has the name scope and is nested under the policy class. The first argument is a user. The second argument is a scope of some kind on which to perform some kind of query who's been active record. Instances of this class respond to the method resolve, which should return some kind of result which can be iterated over. Oh, okay, so is that then assigning that in the controller? You'll probably want to inherit from the application policy scope generator. Application policy scopes admin or not record. You can now use this class for your controller via the policy scope methods. So policy scope. Ah, okay, yes, you're actually using the policy to scope that. Right, okay. Right, okay, so that then checks. Like with authorization, I think it was for the policy scope. Yes, okay. I think I've not used that in certain places. I think because the collection that you're assigning yeah, okay. I'm just gonna keep brushing over that stuff because we don't really care about that right now. Cool. Verify authorize. Yep. Okay, so this is the idea we were talking about where one of the other things we get from Pundit is the ability to check that you've done your authorization. So verify authorized is that example where if you forget and accidentally leave one of the controller actions open, you'll get an error. Basically, it's like, oh, you have to authorize something, even if you want to allow everyone to be able to see this page. You have to tell us explicitly. You have to do something, and the same thing for the policy scoped as well. Yeah, so really big caveat here. This verification mechanism only exists to aid you while you develop your application, so you don't forget to call authorize. It's not some kind of failsafe mechanism or authorization mechanism. You should be able to remove these filters without affecting how your app works. Yep, so they are super helpful. Just make sure you're doing it. And then you get skip authorization if you want to say don't bother doing that, basically. So sometimes you want to explicitly declare which policy to use. Yep, that's what we spoke about. But you're doing it on the class itself. Remember that all of the policy and scope classes are just plain Ruby classes, which means you can use the same mechanisms you always use to drag things up, encapsulate set permissions into a module and include them in multiple policies, use alias method. You can do a bunch of stuff. Use metaprogram if you really have to. In many applications, only logged in users are really able to do anything. If you're building such a system, it can be kind of cumbersome to check that the user in a policy isn't nil for every single permission. Aside from policies, you can add this check to the base class for scopes. We suggest that you define a filter that redirects unauthenticated users to the login page. As a secondary defense, if you've defined an application policy, it might be a good idea to raise an exception if somehow an unauthenticated user got through. This way you can fail more gracefully. So on the initialize for the application policy, if there is no user, you just get not authorized, and on the scope you get the same thing. To support a null object pattern, you may find that you want to implement a nil class policy. This might be useful where you want to extend your application policy to allow some tolerance of, for example, associations which might be nil. Nobody can see nothing. Rescuing and denied authorization in Rails. So this is kind of how, in your application controller, you then decide what you want to do with unauthorized people. And again, you can put logic in here if you've got different types of users and stuff. Custom error messages. Multiple error messages per one policy action. This is all pretty good, like, stuff to read through. Like, if this is your first time, this is like Super useful, I think. Manually retrieving policies and scopes. Let's just... I was going to say, what the bang method will raise an exception if the policy doesn't exist, will return no. Okay, cool. Policy namespacing. Okay, so this is what I was talking about earlier. In some cases, it might be helpful to have multiple policies that serve different contexts for a resource. A prime example of this is where user policies differ from admin policies. To authorize with a namespaced policy, pass that namespace into the authorize helper in an array. So this is what I've done in the past. So authorize, and then you put, like, we've got control panel, you might have admin or something like that. And then you can see here that suddenly you're dealing with a different policy. If you're using namespace policy with something like admin views, it can be useful to override the policy scope and authorize helpers in your admin controller to automatically apply the namespacing. So that could go in our base. What did we have? Control panel base controller last week, and so that could go in here. And so then all of our policies could live. Okay, let's go do some of this stuff. So let's build a policy real quick. Yeah. Let's go build a policy. So in here. It was in, oh look, it's already, oh there we go, okay, so we've already got this. And let's build our namespace one straight away. So what we want to do is swap out, we basically want to take, I guess we can leave the authenticate user, we always care about having a user in there so that can stay. Yeah, do we want, I guess we don't need Devise to kick people out if we're trusting Pundit to kick people out if there's no user. I'm going to leave that in there for now because it doesn't really matter. What we're checking at the moment is just that one exists. So we're going to have control panel and let's namespace that policy. So we can also have control panel, and then in there we are going to have channel policy, and our channel policy okay, policy is going to inherit from our application policy, and oh no, it's namespace, isn't it? So our control panel policy. And what we're going to authenticate, I think we've only got show, I think. And how we're going to authenticate it. So basically, we don't have any users yet. So let's go back to let's go start a server back up and go back to our app. And can do is make a user. So let's sign up to our app. So we're going to have user 1 at example.com. Give them a password. And they're signed up. Cool. So that's user 1 at example.com. And then what we're going to do is make an incognito window. And we are going to try and go to the control panel again. And then we're going to sign up again. And this one is going to be called user 2. So this is going to be the user. One of them will be the user that we don't want. So let's say user 2. Cool. So we've now got 2 users in our system. Well, I've actually got 3 because we've got the one over from last week. And let's say we're going to authorize that's it. We're just going to do a super simple basic one. Like, that's not how we would ever do anything, but we're only going to allow user 2 to access this channels show, control panel channels show, which is this page here that we're looking at. So control panel channels /1. They're viewing the show view for this channel called Every Sunday. And now we want to implement that policy. So if we go back to our docs and just check how that's done. It's right back up the top because it's one of the first things we do. Basically just want to call authorize. So here we've got authorize at post. So if we take that and then go back to our controller, it's our control panel channels controller. We're already doing the setting of the channel in the before action, so that's the same as what's happening on this line here. So then in here we can call authorize post, but we don't have a post, we have a channel. And what we need to do, remember we've namespaced this, so we actually need to pass this and this, and I think that from what it said, that will get us to our control panel channel policy. And we should, I think that might be it. So let's take a look. So here, can I refresh this? Undefined method authorize for control panels controller. So I've obviously missed a step. I have missed a step. Undefined method authorize. Do I not get that from the gem being installed? Do I have to restart the server again? To see if we can get that back. Find method authorize for control panel channels controller. Okay, this is last time someone was watching a log with me and helped me fix my super simple obvious bugs, but we've got no one today, so this is obviously something obvious that I am totally missing. So we've got a gem installed, we think. Go back through the process. Did I put the gem in a group by mistake? No, we then installed it and committed that, so we think we've got Pundit. Then ran the install script to get us policies. And I thought at the controller level that would then give us access to an authorize method. Okay, let's Google. Oh, damn it. I've recently Pundit didn't work like Jammy. I must make it that you've not run Rails Pundit install, or your policies files are not in correct directories. Okay, that's what I thought too. That's what I thought too. Okay, so it's not even saying that it can't find the policy, it's explicitly saying it can't find the authorized method. So what happens if we try and run this? Get access to anything from Pundit? So let's close these down. What does Pundit give us? Do we get any kind of... So we do have those classes, okay. So this is, where is authorize in here? Do I have to explicitly add do I explicitly require this? API public module. Okay. Is it because it can't find that? So what happens if we take that and put the policy at the root? Try that. I've still got that pry running. No, it's the same thing. Okay, let's take that pry out. Doesn't seem to resolve it because it's just not getting that method from. So if I kill that server, are there any other? Just seeing if Ruby's doing anything strange in the background. I was doing some other dev work, so spin that server back up this time. This will be one of those things where if you're watching it, it's really obvious what I fucked up. So, okay, let me just try and put this on the non-namespaced controller then. We do have a channels controller that's not there. Once we put that there, and we should then have the corresponding policy. That's not what this error is telling me. I'm totally just it's absolutely not what this error is telling us. Yeah, it's the same fault. So bring this tab over. Ah, okay. Is include Pundit the first line below your application controller? Ah, okay. So the installer doesn't do that. Okay. Or did we totally miss another step again in there? docs, which we did the other day. Okay, so that would have been really frustrating while you were yelling at me. I do apologize for that. You can yell at me live. You just got to get up on Sunday mornings to do it. Which means we can chuck these back. Okay, so we were in the right place with everything else. So this can go back. It's there. That can go into there. And that can come off here. And this can go back to this. Cool. So if we go to here, that should now work. We have to... I'm just going to start this server again. So in our controllers, application controller include Pundit is now there. Then from our control panel. Amazing. Okay, so that was a long way around because of that error. But basically, if you remember on this browser window, we had our user2 at example.com, and in our permission, what we set up was only allow access. In our policy, sorry, not a permission. Show this, like allow the show action to take place if the user.email equals user2 at example.com. So when we then go to that URL for this user, we're allowed. And on here, what we get is a Pundit not authorized error. And what this array is doing is deciding which policy to take us to, which authorization policy to take us to. And so it's saying it's namespaced. We want to be in the control panel, and we are authorizing on the channel. And then what Pundit is doing is taking this array and working out, it's like, oh, okay, well, hang on a second. I know you're in the show action, so that's the method that we're going to call, but I just need to find out what the policy is. I'm going to take this array and I'm going to infer how that works. And if you remember, just while we were in this code real quick, in the Pundit code itself, you'll see that there is a policy finder class, and that is what this is doing. It's basically saying, okay, well, what am I being passed? Am I being passed an array or a class name and things like that? And it will then go and find the policy. And in our app, that then leads you to control panel, : channel. And then it knows that it's doing the show action. So that's actually the same as doing this. This argument here is just handled automatically because it's in the show method, so we don't need it. You can add it if they were different, for example, if you wanted a different permission. And then here we're only allowing user2. Now, if you remember from the documentation, we can actually decide what happens to someone when they're not allowed, not authorized. So here they're just getting the exception, whereas we can rescue that exception in the application controller. So if we just look at rescue here, what we can do is say rescue from this error with user not authorized. So let's go back into our application controller. And then we can make a method. Cool, we're just going to copy this from the docs. And we're going to say you are not authorized to perform this action. We can send them back where they came from, the page they came from, or the root path. So we can leave that in. And let's refresh this again. So they're still not allowed. And that's the root path there. We haven't done anything with our root directory, so it's still just the default one. But they should still be allowed to get to the public facing one. So you're logged in as user1 at example.com. And I think they'll be able to edit that channel as well, but they can't get to the control panel side of things. So we could take that edit action away now and only allow edits to take place through the control panel. That's just that edit action on the kind of lowest level is just a leftover from that initial tutorial. But we could force everybody into the control panel, and that then makes it so you can only edit through there. There's no edit that takes place on that kind of root level. So what we can also do is not have to enter that each time. So if you remember, there was something in the docs here where we could just use super from within the namespace. Yep, so we could just do policy scope here again. So we can do this in our base controller, which you mentioned earlier. So within our controllers, within our control panel, we have this base controller. And what this is doing at the moment is making sure that we have a user. We can also just add in this method, and that's a method that Pundit is calling. And so it can pop in control underscore panel for us. And then we can come into our control panel channel controller, and I think we can then take this out. And again, we're then relying on Pundit to namespace this for us based on inheriting from this this base controller. So let's see, that should still work. So here we should still be able to refresh this, which has not worked. Unable to find channel policy for oh, I've copied totally the wrong one. That's the policy. That's the scope one, which we're not using yet. So let's refresh this again. And it's still admin. Control panel. Cool. So that then still works for this. And then if we try and get to this URL for this user, which remember they can't access the control panel for channel 1, they will be told they cannot access it. Undefined local variable or method root path for control channels controller. Why would that not have access to root path? Undefined local variable or method root path for controller. That's weird because root path should exist. Why did that only happen when we made that change at the control panel base controller level? This do anything for that? Because root path should just be available to us. Within our application controller. Not doing anything here. In here we're just calling authorize. And it's... So if we try to get to there without that... If we still try to get there, it does still... It does still exist. Okay, so what happens... Where does it think we are at that point? So it's just going to call user not authorized redirect request. We take the refer out and just call root path. Okay, that's super weird. So let's, again, just check in a pry. This, jump over to our server. So does it have channel? Yeah. Does it have a channel path for the channel? It does. Oh, Wait, are we now authorizing? Oh no. Are we now? Also, Pundit not authorized, are not allowed to show this array. Are we suddenly authorizing that root path? So let's just Command D out of that to let the server move on. Are we not defining a root path? Okay, don't we have to define that? Also, didn't that work earlier? Oh, sorry, I was just grabbing that quickly from that Stack Overflow. Actually, how did we get there earlier? I thought root path was totally working. Is it that? Couldn't budge out with that ID. Okay, cool. So it does go somewhere. Didn't we set up a static? Okay, so you have to define root, but how did we get to where we got to before? Was it redirecting to... Can we just do that? Was that working? Check a root, so can we do it? Oh, I don't even need to do that, do we? We could just put in the actual thing. I mean, we actually want to do something sensible with people, but presumably we could do... Oops. Cool, okay. Okay, so I've obviously mistaken when that... I thought that worked earlier, but it didn't. Okay, so user2 at example.com can still access this control panel, and then now we have, when user1 tries to access this URL still, even though we've handed all the namespace now to that base model, it will still just redirect them nicely. And you'd probably send them to a sign-in page, you'd probably do something more sensible with them. And so that's it, we now have Pundit installed and up and running. I'd be interested to look, so basically when we were looking at that Rolify stuff earlier, I think what we can then do is basically assign roles to the users and define them and do stuff. But then when we actually check in our policy, I'd imagine the way that working is that you would go into your policy and say, right, well, user dot, I can't remember the API, but it would be something like user has role admin. And then presumably you can do, has a role scope to an instance, so you could do something like user has role moderator, and then you have resource, and resource in this case is going to be the channel because that's been set in the application policy here. So, so it's record, not resource, sorry. You could change that name if you didn't like it, I guess, but that makes sense. So then you're using that instance of the channel and say, okay, well, is this user a moderator for this channel? And you could, presumably on the channel policy, you could do something like, well, you could just alias it, but you wanted some sort of thing. You might do some sort of lookup here or some other fancy thing that you cared about, and then that could become that. So that's the kind of Rolify of it all, which I'm interested in, because for this kind of simple app, we don't really want to deal with the edge cases I was describing as to why I haven't used something like roles before. But this looks pretty good, so let's see if we can get that up and running as well in the app. So that's kind of all I wanted to touch on today. So let's do a little bit of tidy up. Let's commit some of this stuff. So yeah, I should normally have done this as I was going, but again, on the streams, I'm not really doing that, so I have to keep going back and tidying stuff up later. Install initial Pundit. No, because I'm about to commit the change I just made for Rolify, which doesn't exist. Install initial policy. Note the readjust for a dummy email here. No real code. And the policy. And then also added the name spacing of the policies to the controller. Space is just a reminder. Stuff to note when I go back and tidy that up. So that's committed up there. Cool. So do want to go through and tidy this up, and there, God knows, I mean, how many commits are there in this? Okay, things have got a little out of hand on the on the others branch. Normally, maybe I think I would consider 5 to 10 a lot of whip commits before starting to tidy things up. That's going to be a lot of ways to go back and tidy it. But I am going to do that at some point that I will decide later. So hopefully that was useful if you've been interested in adding authorization, or you just wanted to take a look at Pundit or other gems or stuff like that. Thanks a lot for checking the channel out, and come back next week. Like I said, we'll have a bit of a look at specific things that we want to add. Let me just jump over and get rid of this code. So we will go and take a bit of a plan, put together a bit of a plan for the steps we want to build for the app, and also put a UI together, which I think will kind of make the streams a bit more usable and kind of see the results of this stuff rather than just dummy examples. But thanks a lot, and have a great week, everyone.